What's a let that sink in fun fact? It took humanity approximately 4 times longer to switch from copper swords to steel swords than it took to switch from steel swords to nuclear bombs. If the Sun were scaled down to the size of a white blood cell, the Milky Way galaxy would be the size of the continental United States. The vastness of space is mind-boggling. Next to the U.S. Army, Disney World is the largest buyer and importer of explosives in the USA. We are closer to the year 2040 than the year of 1997. Your bones are wet. I now feel weird. Now all I can think about is my bones slipping and sliding around under my muscles. I don't like it. When NASA pitched the idea of the Voyager missions to Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the USA, with the idea of touring the outer planets, he was told that the last time it was possible, Thomas Jefferson was in the White House, he was the third president. The particular planetary alignment that Voyager 2 used on its journey occurs only once every 176 years. The Titanic had 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. There was a woman called Violet Jessup, a nurse and a cruise liner stewardess that worked on all 3. The Olympic crashed into a warship whilst leaving harbor but was able to make it back. She was on the Titanic as it sank and is referenced in the Titanic film, a stewardess that was told to set an example to the non-English speaking passengers as the ship sank. She looked after a baby on lifeboat 16 until being rescued by the Carpathia the next day. It's not known what exactly caused the sinking of the Britannic, but the lifeboats hit the water too early. As the ship sank, the rear listed up and a number of the lifeboats were sucked into the propellers. Violet had to jump out of the lifeboat she was in and sustained a serious head injury, but survived. She was on board for all 3 incidents in the space of 5 years. She went back to continue to work at sea for another 30 years before retiring in 1950. She died of heart failure in 71. If you live in the USA, you have better odds of dating Taylor Swift than dying of bird flu and Ebola combined. There was a time in history when trees existed but the fungi which causes wood to rot had not yet evolved to digest wood. Dead trees and plants would pile up and the 35% oxygen atmosphere caused massive fires. This is also the time where petrified wood came from. Trees would sit in mud for 1,000s of years and not rot while minerals slowly replaced the wood structures. Fires and 35% oxygen, and wood everywhere. I'd be fucking petrified too. The man who invented the frisbee was cremated and turned into a frisbee. And Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. were born in the same year. Queen Elizabeth and Marilyn Monroe were born a month apart. Scientists who work with cockroaches often develop allergies towards cockroaches. At the same time, they also develop allergies to pre-ground coffee. Also heard that people that get bit by cockroaches often develop allergies for both cockroaches and shellfish. Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. T. Rex lived 65 million years ago. There's another one similar to that. The Egyptians were a force in 2000 BC, the Romans were in power at around 0 C. The Egyptians are as old to Romans as the Romans are to us. Egyptians are very fun to consider. When the Romans were in power, the pyramids of the Egyptians were already 2,500 years old. More ancient to them than the ancient Egyptians are to us today, and they didn't have pictures nor internet. Even more than staggering, the Sphinx actually shows signs of possible water erosion. This would put its creation at 6th millennium BC. That's fucking crazy. 2,000 years ago dudes stood there a bit like, man, how the fuck did they even? 2,000 years later, and we're still like, man, how the fuck? History is so kick-ass. In the USA, more soldiers die from suicide than in combat. The Great Pyramid was built before the last woolly mammoth died. Vending machines kill 4 times as many people per year as sharks. Pineapples take 2 years to grow. You can place all the planets of our solar system between Earth and Moon, and even have a bit of spare space after. 10 out of 10 scientists all agree that this is a bad idea and should not be attempted. When humans started farming, blue eyes in humans hadn't evolved, mutated yet. Every person with blue eyes has one common ancestor. Reese Witherspoon is my ancestor? The cigarette lighter was actually invented before the match. and before the cigarette. Dozens of Americans die every day from slipping in the shower and hitting their heads. Dozens, I tell you. It's one of the primary leading causes of non-medical deaths in the USA. This makes me appreciate the lime buildup in my tub from decades of hard water. It won't go away, but my crusty tub is never slippery. That's why you gotta sit in the shower and enjoy relaxation of not going to die. Betty White is older than sliced bread. There is, on average, a supernova explosion every 50 years in the Milky Way. On average, there are 30 every second in the observable universe. Wow, let me just repeat that. Do you know how big the universe must be if it's 30 explosions every second while taking 50 years in our galaxy? After hitting the iceberg, it took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to fully submerge underwater. There are more chickens in America than people on the planet. Neutron stars have such strong gravity that if you dropped a marshmallow into one, it would be like dropping a 3-megaton nuclear warhead on Earth. Also, if you add mass to a neutron star, the volume of the star shrinks. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump were all born within a 66-day stretch. Macaulay Culkin is now older than Catherine O'Hara was when she played his mom in Home Alone. If you have clean water and temperature control, you are better off than half the population. The first electric car was invented at the end of the 19th century, and it went 65 miles per hour. Because early gas engines had very low torque, some of the earliest cars were gas electric. Sharks are older than trees. Advaita, the longest living animal ever, was a giant tortoise given to Clive of India. He was born around 1750 and died in 2006. He existed longer than the United States has. There are more tigers privately owned in Texas than tigers in the wild. Your computer is much more likely of contracting a virus by surfing legitimate church sites than by surfing NORP sites. Porn sites generally have experts combating viral stuff, while church sites are maintained by lower-tech volunteers, as a rule. The overall goal in golf is to play less golf. The Holy Roman Empire existed until 30 years after the United States was founded, 1776 to 1806. The Oxford University is actually older than the Aztecs. The moon orbits us from the west to the east, but we see it move across the sky east to west because of the rate of the Earth's rotation. Our observation is like being in a faster car watching a slower car, heading in the same absolute direction, fall further and further behind us. France was still using the guillotine when the first Star Wars film came out. Over the space of 3 days, an estimated 165 people survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bomb attacks. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is one of the more famous ones, who was only 2 miles from ground zero when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It hit when he was walking to work on the last day of a work trip. After he heard the drone of a plane, he looked up at it, and the sky lit up. He was then plucked from the ground, spun around and tossed into a nearby potato field. Miraculously he survived, despite being covered in burns, soaked in radiation, and with 2 blown eardrums. He spent a night in an air shelter, then took an overnight sleeper train home to Nagasaki to see his family. When he made it to a hospital in Nagasaki, he was so burnt a childhood friend didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. Despite his wounds, he made it to work the next day. He started giving his boss a rundown on what happened, and his boss thought he was crazy. There was no way one bomb could destroy a city. Suddenly, a bright light lit up the room. He panicked and dropped to the floor of the office seconds before the shock wave smashed out the office windows. He had just been hit twice by a nuclear blast in the space of 3 days. At the age of 93, he was given the title, Niji Hibakusha, or twice bombed person. He died the next year. So next time you think you're having a shitty week at work, yeah? To be in the top 1% of Americans in terms of income, you need to rake in about $400,000 a year. Rounded off to $1,000 a day. Your body consists of roughly a 1-to-1 ratio of bacterial to human cells. The US dropped 26,172 bombs last year. That's almost 72 per day. That's about 3 bombs an hour. Every hour. For the entire year. In 2017, the US had already dropped more bombs than that by September. It is unlikely that a person could actually die in quicksand, since most quicksand is only a few inches deep. Most people who do die in quicksand get stuck in tidal basins and drown when the tide comes in. Source: has been stuck in quicksand to my armpits, but I got out before the tide came in. If you choose not to have children, you are the first person in your direct ancestry all the way back to the first humans related to you to not have children. Actually, you would be the first organism in your line not to reproduce, all the way back to the very first organism 4 billion or so years ago. Great fact! What other interesting fact do you know? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.